If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these 3 key aims. If you're a parent, you also learn how to raise empowered kids, ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
Welcome back to the Godly Impact Podcast, and we are continuing today our series, It's All in Your Head. I want to invite you, first of all, to share this podcast with 2 friends. It's going to help other people to be able to have some great information that can make a real difference in their lives, and it's going to give you somebody else to talk this about with, because the thing is that whenever we are really working on something of significance in our lives, the more that we are able to share that with other people who can understand what we're doing, and they're on their own journey with this, it gives us a community, it gives us help, it gives us support, it gives us accountability, it gives us all of those things that we need, especially when we are working on making a change in our lives. And I hope you are. I hope there's some area in your life, at least, that you're like, you know what, I want to grow in this area. Because we never hit a point where we've got it all together and then we just sail through life. I wish that were the case, but it's not. So last time we began this series, we opened this series, and the closing was a call to action to start paying attention to the stories you're telling yourself. Because all of us do. We all tell ourselves stories every single day. And they don't always begin with once upon a time, and they certainly don't always end with, and they lived happily ever after. But we tell ourselves dozens, maybe hundreds of stories every day. Some we might rehash and go on for quite a period of time, and others might take about 7 seconds from beginning to end. And so my encouragement to you last time was to begin paying attention to those stories, especially the micro stories that you tell yourself. And so just how is that going? What have you been discovering about yourself as you have been adopting this practice? Now, if you're new to this practice, it can be intimidating. But paying attention to our stories is work. Everything that leads to health and maturity is. But if you stick with it, eventually it becomes enjoyable work, kind of like exercise. Now, hear me out on this. I am so not an exercise nut, even though I do try to adhere to a regular exercise regimen. And my exercise regimen is really simple. Pretty much it's just designed to keep me from looking and feeling like a bowl of mashed potatoes, because I am past the age where inactivity just makes me look like a couch potato. I am in the no exercise, and that is going to equal mashed potato years. And so I still have to talk myself into following my exercise routine several times a week. I would like to think someday I'm going to reach the point where I just wake up and I'm just going to say, I just can't wait to go lift weights today, or go for a walk, or go on a bike ride. And occasionally, very occasionally, that does happen, but it's not the norm. So in the meantime, what I rely on instead are habits and dopamine that accompanies movement to get me motivated. And paying attention to our stories is similar. It's rest of life work. It's not seasonal. It's not something, I do this once and then I'm done. It's like, no, this has to become part of how I show up in life if I want to be, if I want to become, and if I want to remain an emotionally, mentally, spiritually, relationally healthy person. But once you've experienced the benefits of this, you're going to want to keep at it. Now remember, we're not just looking for the negative stories that are costing us energy, opportunity, and resources. We're also looking for the positive ones that we need to preserve and protect. Because sometimes we can have some really good habits, but have you ever noticed how life has a way of just kind of wearing away even at our good habits? Kind of like the waves on a beach that can just continue to wear away, perhaps at the the erosion of the beach that occurs there. And so factors have to, work has to be done in order to maintain what's good that's there. So we want to be doing that as well. But even these two labels, negative and positive, they don't necessarily serve us well because we don't want to just think, oh, our goal has to be to get rid of all the negative stories and only hold on to positive ones. That's not our goal here. So I'm going to suggest that instead of thinking in terms of positive and negative, we think in terms of true, untrue, and unknown. Because if a story is true but negative, our goal isn't to make it positive. I mean, that won't make it true. Let's say, for example, someone makes a deliberate, caustic, cutting, hateful remark, and somebody said to me, I don't know why you're wasting your time with a podcast. I mean, nobody listens. I don't need to tell myself, I don't think they meant that. I think they're really a cheerleader. They really do want me to succeed at this. I mean, no. I mean, that might be positive, but it's certainly not true. So our goal in life is, as godly impact, is dependent on dealing with reality, not creating some sort of fantasy world to inhabit. Negative stories that are true can function like a great home security system. They keep out intruders that would rob us or worse. But the problem is that deciding what's true is we are hardwired for confirmation bias. And confirmation bias, it's a type of ownership bias that all of us are susceptible to. We don't get to the place where, that doesn't apply to me. No. Confirmation bias, ownership bias, it applies to all of us. So a real practical example of this is, for example, ownership bias is that's what keeps us hanging on to clothes in our closet that we haven't worn for 6 years and we never really liked to begin with. Maybe somebody gave us a gift card to our favorite store. If they did that, we wouldn't consider buying those items that are hanging in our closet with that gift card for a second. But because we've already given them space in our closet and tagged them as ours, we own them, we keep them. Why? Well, there's a variety of different reasons, but sometimes we just keep them because the only thing that they return back is guilt. No gratitude wells up in us when we see those items, but guilt continues to weigh on us. Why? Maybe we don't wear those clothes anymore because we've gained weight. And you can definitely, the jeans that are hanging there in your closet that you used to be able to fit in, no, they're not speaking to you out loud. At least I hope not. If so, you either have a very interesting pair of jeans or you need to get your hearing checked at least. But those jeans do make a statement to us. We register that in your mind, in our minds. And they're not positive statements, Hey, dummy, if you didn't eat so much, you could still wear these, but no, you just have to stuff your face, blah, 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 right? And so those are the kind of, and yet we continue to hang on to these jeans. It's like, why do we do these kinds of things when every time that we see them, all that wells up in us is guilt? We wouldn't keep a person in our closet that continued to say that to us every time. But sometimes we don't think anything about keeping clothes in our closet that send us those kind of messages. By the way, I'm just assuming that you wouldn't be keeping a person in your closet no matter what kind of messages that they were sending. But you get my point. We can also feel guilty because they were gifted to us. And we just have to hang on to them because if we got rid of them, if the giver ever shows up and asks about them or does a closet inspection, we're going to have an accounting if we don't have those. Now, I get that there are people who give gifts and they have an expectation that you better hang on to it forever. And if that's what you're afraid of, well, then you probably need to have some work to do in order to have some communication, to have some good boundaries, because you still don't need to be hanging on to stuff that isn't beneficial for you just because somebody else might get upset because you don't like it. Maybe you never did, or your tastes have changed, or your style, or whatever. We also can keep things because we paid a good chunk of change for that outfit. And even though it doesn't really fit, or we don't really like it, or it wasn't a good buy to begin with, we keep hanging on to it anyway. Ownership bias is real, and it's not just limited to the clothes that we have hanging in our closet. Sometimes we keep hanging on to the stories that we have told ourselves the same way that we hang on to our clothes, even though what they say to us can be demeaning, can be negative, and can be destructive. Why? Because confirmation bias, ownership bias, it's a real thing. Psychologically, we're hardwired for that. And so once we've told ourselves a story about ourselves or about someone else, it's ours. It's my story. I wrote that story. Even if it was an 8-second story, it's my story. And we become protective of it. We nurture it. We don't want anybody to mess with our stories. Now, sometimes the best thing for our closets, well, for us, would be if we had a courageous friend that came over and just cleaned our closet out for us. And in the same way, we need to have courageous people in our lives who will challenge our stories. Why are you still hanging on to that? Let's look at the facts, not just what you've told me, but let's look at all the facts. I'm going to ask you some real questions to see, are there things that you're leaving out? Is there a different way to look at this? Maybe that story was true at one time, but have you or they changed? Maybe you need to let some stories go. Maybe it was true at one time and it served a purpose, or maybe it was something that never should have been given space to begin with. Either way, we have to be willing to say goodbye to our stories because they have very real power in our lives. Now, the more emotionally attached we are to our stories, the greater the chance that confirmation or ownership bias is at work. Okay, that's so necessary for us to hear. I'm going to say that one more time. The more emotionally attached we are to our stories, the greater the likelihood that confirmation bias or ownership bias is at work. And those things are so powerful that they can look at things and just the facts that are evident to anybody else and totally twist them and distort them. We looked at that a little bit last time with King Saul. You see, when we are truly secure as people, we're not threatened by someone challenging our stories. We welcome it. And I don't mean just in some sort of artificial, external, oh, okay, thank you, kind of way. And then they leave and we're like, well, what do they know? I don't know. I mean, I can't, I'm never going to tell them anything again. They just don't understand. I mean, all those kind of things that we can do. But to really be willing to look at our stories and go, let me see if there's a different way to look at this. Again, I'm going to go back to King Saul. We talked about him a little bit in last week's episode. He became so jealous of David's success that he began telling himself that David was his enemy. And there was zero truth in this. The truth was the exact opposite. This needs to be a sobering wake-up call, how significant it is, how as people, we can be so convinced of something that we think is 100% true, and it is in fact 0% true. Not just 90% true or 80 or 10 or 50, like 0% truth to it. And more than once, people in Saul's circle, including his very own son, Jonathan, tried to present evidence so that Saul would challenge his story. They tried to present evidence to say, no, King, no, Dad, that's not who David is. And they would point out actual objective facts. But you know what? Saul was so committed to his story that at one point he even threatened his own son, who was trying to get him to see his story was wrong. And it was costly because it was wrong. And so Saul goes so far as to hurl a spear at his own son. That is how deluded a person can become when they're unwilling to have their stories challenged. Now, I'm guessing that you don't carry a bunch of javelins around that you can, just launch at somebody who challenges your story. But we have different types of javelins that we can launch. We can use our words. We can use ghosting someone. We can use attacking someone. We have all different kinds of ways that we can actually hurl javelins at someone when they challenge a story that we are telling ourselves. And we want to be really careful with that. So this week, I want you to continue to monitor your stories, especially those micro stories that you tell yourself, because those micro stories add up over a period of time. And if you find yourself that, most of these micro stories that I'm telling myself, the person in the store, the clerk in the store just took forever. And, I just stand in line 10 minutes longer than I should have. That person ought to be fired because they don't know what they're doing. And doesn't this store manager hire good people? Right? All of those are stories that we tell ourselves. And they have an influence on the mindset that we then carry into other things. The more negative, or more importantly, untrue or even unknown stories that you tell yourself, even in these micro settings, the more you're going to carry that into other aspects of your life where the stakes might be a whole lot higher. If you go throughout the day telling yourself a bunch of negative stories about other people and how they just don't know what they're doing and they did that intentionally and that person shouldn't be allowed to drive and that colleague at work, is just always trying to take the credit for my work and they never want to show up and do their part because you're not going to walk home at night and be like, wow, everybody is so awesome and life is great and I'm so filled with joy. That is not going to be how you show up. So be curious about your stories. And again, don't hide. If you're starting to see, wow, some of these stories I'm telling myself, these do not reflect well on me. Okay, well, again, you can't change what you don't name. You can't change what you don't bring into the light. So don't get defensive because that's not going to help you out at all. Sometimes it seems like defensiveness is a great protector, but in reality, defensiveness just pretends to be our friend, but it's never really on our side. Instead of getting defensive, get curious. Really start looking at the stories that you are telling yourself and maybe start asking yourself, why? Why are these the stories that I tell myself? This is so incredibly important. This isn't just like, woo, oh yeah, that'd be nice, but it doesn't really matter. No, this really, really matters in every aspect of life. You see, our stories become our beliefs, and our beliefs become our actions, and our actions become our nature, and our nature becomes our impact. And the more that we tell ourselves the same type of stories, the more we condition ourselves to tell ourselves similar stories, not just in those exact same situations, but we carry those over into other situations, into other opportunities, into other relationships. So you do have an immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable impact. It's not a matter of if, but it is a matter of what kind of impact that you're going to have. Let's make it a godly one. And one of the ways we do that is by paying attention to the stories that we are telling ourselves. All right, my friend, we're going to continue this series next week. In the meantime, don't forget, go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, subscribe to my weekly newsletter, and you also can contact me about speaking engagements as well. All right, until next time, keep listening to the stories that you're telling yourself.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website, stephaniepresents.com, to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.